Truth Revolution.
Welcome to Truth Revolution. This is where faith and reason meet. I'm Pastor Dave, and way over there is Pastor Jeff.
Hey.
We can hardly see each other.
We're practicing social distancing.
We're being politically correct, which is weird for us.
Well, you know, a lot of people are worried about this coronavirus thing. I would think it's smart to exercise some precautions, especially when you're around someone as filthy as me.
Right.
I haven't showered for 3 weeks. It's an experiment.
Wow.
I'm seeing with all the social distance, can anyone notice?
Yeah, that's not a failed experiment.
I'm just... Anyway, we are talking about coronavirus. We're talking about viruses in general. We've got a very special guest with us today. Dave, who have we got on the show today?
We have molecular biologist AJ Roberts, and she writes and speaks about harmonizing science and the Christian faith. As a research scholar at Reasons to Believe, AJ is committed to seeking truth in science and scripture and sharing the great news of grace, hope, forgiveness, new life, and truth found in Jesus Christ.
AJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Dave, glad to be here.
Awesome. This is the first time we've had you. Of course, we've had people from Reasons. Heros, Fuzzrana, Jeff Zurink, all the time. And so we haven't had a chance to talk to you. And I'm glad you're here. This is going to be fun.
Thanks. So, really glad to be here. I wish it was under slightly different circumstances, but I'll take what I can get.
Right. You know, actually, the interesting thing is we had this scheduled before we were in quarantine, before all this happened. This is really good. Now, just to put the question out there for people, we're going to be talking about viruses. You're a molecular biologist. Biologist doesn't mean that you don't know anything about viruses. It doesn't mean just, bacteria and stuff. I mean, would it be fair to call you a virologist or tell us some of your...
Absolutely. Actually, I am technically a molecular virologist. Most people don't know what a virologist is, but maybe they will now. And so we've gone with molecular biologist to make it more general so that people sort of have a better idea.
So actually you are a molecular virologist, and this has been kind of your life study.
Absolutely. I've been studying viruses. I first became intrigued with them as an undergrad student, and I've been studying them all through my graduate career, my postdoc career, and a stint at the NIH, where I actually worked for 3 years on the first SARS coronavirus.
Really?
SARS coronavirus was emerging in 2003, and I worked on it from 2003 through 2006 at the National Institutes of Health.
That's incredible. What kind of work did you do?
Well, so we were developing primarily animal models that could mimic aspects of human disease. And that's one of the things that you have to have if you want to try and test potential vaccines or potential drugs. You have to be able to test their efficacy and their safety in at least a couple of different animal models. And for you to be able to do that, the animal models first have to demonstrate disease.
That is awesome.
That's really interesting.
So, Dave and I love to talk about stuff like this. We love to lead people, as pastors, we want to give people good information in the middle of all this. And so I think it's fair to say we're talking to the right lady.
Absolutely.
So now, before we even jump into how this relates to God or how big of a deal this is, what we should do, give us the, seventh grade science difference between a virus and bacteria.
It's a great question, even for seventh grade science. It's also a great question for graduate students. But mostly, the difference is that viruses, by most people's perspective, and certainly by mine, are not alive. Living things have to be able to do certain things. They have to be able to take nutrients from their environment. They have to be able to process those nutrients. They have to be able to get rid of waste. They have to be able to grow and reproduce, basically, if you put them in the right environment with the right nutrients.
Okay.
And viruses can't do any of those things.
What?
Bacteria can do all of those things. And so viruses absolutely need a living cell in order to use the cell's machinery, the cell's resources, and the cell's energy to make more virus.
Wow. Okay. I apparently need to go back to seventh grade.
That's insane, dude.
Okay. So how does that work then? Is it just, it takes over a living cell inside my body, and then how does it reproduce itself? How does it keep going?
Yeah. So different viruses are very different from one another, and there are a lot of different ways that viruses can sort of set up a productive infection. So some do. They go in and they sort of hijack the cellular machinery, and they turn the cells protein synthesis, those molecules that make proteins and help the cell to be a cell and make more cells. They sort of take over all of those processes and they hijack them to make virus proteins and virus nucleic acids. And so some viruses work that way. Other viruses are a little bit more covert. They'll go in and they'll sort of integrate their own genomes into the genome or the DNA of the cell. And they'll just sort of hang out there, and every once in a while, under favorable circumstances for the virus, they'll get reactivated, and the cell will start to make more virus. But the virus can sort of hang out for a long time and just be there. That's what herpes does. It's sort of what HIV does as well. They just sort of hang out in a latent state, and sometimes they'll get reactivated and make more virus.
Wow, that's incredible. I hardly even know what question to ask. So.
Can I ask a question? I mean,
yeah, you're part of this show too.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. That's crazy to think that they're not alive, but there's been talk about the COVID virus can live for 32 days on certain surfaces. I mean, what's with that kind of language?
Yeah, man, we use that kind of language all the time about viruses. Number one, because it makes sense, so it makes sense to call a virus alive. That way people understand that it's sort of dangerous, and, you want to kill it. You want to be virucidal, even if you don't want to be homicidal. But viruses aren't really alive. And so what you're really technically doing is you're inactivating them. And you should refer to a virus that can still infect people but is outside of a living cell as viable, which means it has the ability to make more virus if it gets into the right cell under the right circumstances. But it's not really alive. You're not really killing it. You're inactivating it, and it's viable. So
okay, so if the virus is really using our own cells, whereas bacteria are its own living thing, is that one of the reasons we were able to discover cures for bacteria much more easily than viruses? Because viruses essentially are our own cells or taking over our own cells? Or is it something different?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Jeff, you just got an A in science class.
All right. Finally passed seventh grade.
You're right. That's absolutely right. So we have a lot of antibacterials, right? Antibiotics. And we can develop antibiotics much more easily in comparison to antivirals because bacteria have their own independent life cycle, and we can target that independent life cycle. But because viruses are using our own cells, to target something that will stop a virus once it's inside the cell is much trickier because you don't want to affect the normal functions of normal cells. And so you have to be able to identify something that's unique to that virus that's different than the cell and try and target that.
So in that way, I'm not saying in all ways, but in that way, a virus is a little bit more like a cancer than it is a bacteria.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, that's not a bad way to think about it.
So, but what is it? Is it just a random piece of code that gets inside of our cells, or?
Yeah. So again, viruses are really different from one another, but they all have two basic components. So every virus will have at least these two components. They'll have some type of nucleic acid. So they'll either have DNA, which pretty much everyone knows what DNA is, or they'll have something called RNA, which is a slightly different molecular form. RNA is what's used to make proteins. DNA is sort of the template to get to RNA to get to proteins. So the virus will either have genetic information that's DNA, or it'll have genetic information that's RNA. And then it will also, all viruses will also have protein. And the protein will basically wrap itself around the nucleic acid, or it will surround, like with
hey, we lost you for a second.
Acid.
Could you repeat?
DNA.
We lost you for a second. Could you repeat that last sentence?
So viruses will have protein that either wrap itself around the nucleic acids, the genome, or it will be like a container around the genome. And so all viruses will have two components, protein plus either DNA or RNA. Some other viruses will also have an envelope around the outside made up of a lipid substance that's usually derived from the host cell's cell membrane. And the virus picks that membrane or that envelope up as it's produced in the cell or as it exits the cell.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting.
So 2 or 3 components:
now,
protein, nucleic acid, and sometimes a lipid envelope.
Okay. And I read online, which is always a great source of information.
Yeah, believe everything.
It can be.
that this novel coronavirus was an RNA version. Is that accurate? True? Do we know? I don't know.
Absolutely. So all coronaviruses, and there are a wide variety of coronaviruses, some of them in humans only cause the cold, and some are doing what this virus is doing. But all coronaviruses are very large RNA viruses. So that means they have a large RNA genome, and they also happen to have protein, and they also happen to have that envelope, that lipid layer.
Okay. And does it make a difference for us whether it's an RNA or a DNA as far as like how it affects us in general?
That's a great question. So each different virus family affects us differently, and they also infect us differently. So they have different routes of entry, and then once they're in the types of cells that they can infect, they may or may not move to different cell types, and then they may or may not lead to different symptoms. And so it depends on the virus biology, but to make a general statement like RNA viruses all affect us this way it's too general. We can't really make those kinds of statements. Okay,
that makes sense.
Good.
I've been hearing stuff about, we got these. So when this thing first hit, everybody's like, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to counteract this thing. But now there's slowly things coming out. I don't know what to believe. Some people say, well, if you start feeling itchy throat, just drink hot water. That'll kill it. It'll drive it down into your digestive tract. What the heck is going on with all that?
I saw a guy online say, if you catch it, what you need to do is get a hair dryer and turn it on high and blow it up your nose because it can't live in hot air.
Wow.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Jeff, I saw that same thing.
Yeah.
And Dave, I've heard that same thing. So most people don't know this. And by most people, I mean almost everybody, including all the people who've been like saturated with information about this virus. Coronaviruses are respiratory and enteric viruses.
Enteric.
What does that mean? It means that they can actually go through the digestive system. And so they're actually very stable in acidic environments. And so they can pass through the GI system, and they can actually create GI type symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms. In 30 to 50% of the cases, hope I can say this, people actually like end up with diarrhea.
Really?
And so all coronaviruses, not just this one, all coronaviruses are both respiratory and enteric, which means they can have GI effects.
Okay, so I've learned something. Yeah, people were right to hoard toilet paper.
In a kind of strange way, they were, I guess.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so
maybe they were being led by the Spirit.
Right. Let's go a little bit to this specific virus then. As far as you can tell, I mean, how dangerous is this compared to some other viruses that we know of?
So compared to influenza, this virus is pretty dangerous. It's probably, influenza can come in different varieties, but if we're talking about just the seasonal flu like we have now, this virus is much more dangerous. Even though really bad cases of influenza can end the same way that this virus can end, sort of by an acute respiratory distress, a horrible kind of pneumonia that actually inhibits a person's ability to get oxygen to the rest of their organs, and it can actually lead to widespread organ failure and death. That's worst case scenario. That can happen with influenza, including even this one. But because it's seasonal and it's been around in the population since 2009, we all have base immunity to this.
Okay.
And about 50% of the U.S. population has been immunized. They've gotten the flu shot this year. And so we have 50% that's protected by the flu shot. We have a drug that can treat influenza in the first 48 hours. And we have, as a population, widespread baseline immunity to the virus.
Okay.
This virus, although the course of disease is more profound in most cases than it is in influenza, so worst case scenario happens more frequently with this one than with influenza, we're completely naive. There is no baseline immunity. There is no way that we can artificially boost our immune systems to help protect us with a vaccine because one doesn't exist yet. And as of today, there's also no drug that is effectively and consistently treating it. Although there is some cases, some reports out there that some of the medications that we've had available for malaria.
Yeah, I heard that.
Some effects, right? So everybody's scrambling to try and figure out how to protect people, but we're a globally naive population, and that makes it really dangerous because it can have such severe symptoms and can have such severe outcome.
Okay. Now that's pretty fascinating. Now I've seen online, I've been tracking with some of those numbers. You know, they say globally, the death rate is just about 5%.
That's right.
I noticed though in Italy, you know, if you discount Italy and Spain, like their death rate is more like 12%.
I think it's just under 11%.
Just under 11.
It's right around there. It's over 10%, and that's troubling. Yeah.
And in the U.S., it looks like right now it's about 1.7%. Do you know why the disparity between those countries?
Actually, I think that number is too high for the U.S. That may be the infectivity rate that you just quoted. The death rate for us right now is only at 0.2%.
0.2%.
Yeah, right now it's at 0.2%, but it's early because we just started getting all of our cases. You know, we're just starting to see an increase, a logarithmic increase in the number of cases in different hotspots. I mean, New York City's been there for a while, but New York City also has the most deaths so far. So I was on social media today, and one of the guys that asks me questions periodically from Greece, I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "I'll let you know in 14 days." And so I mean, it was a great response because people who are becoming sick today, if they're going to have a really bad outcome, we probably won't know that for 14 days or more.
Okay.
And so there's this lag between the cases that are expanding in numbers. So we're seeing the U.S. cases grow, but we're not seeing the deaths grow at that same rate. And we wouldn't expect to see the peak in deaths until about a 2 or 3 week lag.
Yeah.
Right? So things have been really bad in Italy for 3 weeks. Okay. And Italy's death rate has seemingly just peaked just this past 4 or 5 days. It seems like they've gotten off of the highs, and the death rate is slowly coming down on the other side.
Okay. Now I've seen some websites that are trying to keep track of these numbers, but they're slightly different numbers than you have. Do you have a place online that maybe we could find some accurate numbers?
Oh, really? The best place to go is the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and that's probably where you've gone. It's the one that shows you the map, the black map with the red bubbles. But if you look for Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, they'll have a coronavirus or a COVID page there, and they'll have a live interactive map, and you can go and look at the different daily new cases or cumulative totals, the people that have recovered, the people that have died by country.
Okay, good.
The other thing you can do is you can sign up for daily situation reports that Hopkins will send you in your email, and you can read their assessment of what's going on in the world.
I don't know if I want that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's what I was just thinking. I was like, there's definitely some people who should not sign up for that. Right. But good. Let's move off. There's the virus in terms of science and death rate, and think about it theologically now.
Okay.
Okay, we as Christians believe God is involved in everything. We don't think he's, some deistic faraway God. Why on earth did God create viruses? What's going on there?
Yeah, I can't emphasize one word in the next sentence too strongly. The vast, and that's the word I would emphasize. I would probably repeat it, 200 times, but your audience would lose interest.
Okay.
The vast amount of viruses don't cause disease of any kind. And in fact,
oh wait, you broke up. You broke up, and
all life forms.
You broke up again, and I have a feeling that was a really important sentence. So could you get back up and say that again, because we lost you?
It was a very important sentence.
Terrible. I don't know what our internet's doing. Maybe we have a virus.
So you heard the comment about I can't repeat vast enough times?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So viruses, the vast majority aren't associated with disease of any kind. In fact, the vast majority are critical for life to flourish on planet Earth, including us. Without viruses, without viruses, Earth would be one giant ball of bacteria floating through space.
Okay,
Really?
so viruses help keep us alive. Air high five, Dave. Yes. All right. What on earth? How come we were never taught this in school? I mean, most people don't know this.
Yeah, because we actually didn't know it for a really long time. Certainly not through all of my graduate school studies, and through most of my postdoc and most of my career afterwards. We didn't really know this. We've only known this for about maybe 15, maybe 20 years. And the reason is because historically we've known about viruses because they cause disease.
Yeah.
And we've observed, a sick animal, a sick plant, a sick person, and inquiring minds have gone in and said, what's making the plant, the animal, the person sick? And what we've discovered are viruses like rabies and, foot and mouth disease and tobacco mosaic virus that makes tobacco plants sick. And so it's because we've observed disease and we've gone and asked what's causing the disease that we discovered viruses, and those are the only viruses that we knew about for a very long time. But now we have the ability to go out into the environment and take any kind of sample that we want and ask what's in that sample. And what we see is that there's an extraordinary amount of bacteria in every sugar cube's worth of dirt. And there's an extraordinary amount of bacteria in every sugar cube's worth of seawater or ocean water. And what we know now is that the viruses in that same amount of dirt or water outnumber the bacteria by a factor of 10 or 15.
Wow.
And so viruses are everywhere. It's amazing how many viruses surround us in our daily life. And most of them, almost all of them, are not associated with any kind of disease.
Okay.
I've never wanted to hug a virus before, but I kind of do right now.
Now I kind of feel bad for using Purell so often. Like,
oh, no, that's okay. You can't kill them, remember? No.
Wait, if we can't kill them, what does Purell do?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Purell's probably doing a great job at helping you get rid of the influenza virus on your hands. And it might actually be getting rid of some of the SARS on your hands. But the alcohol concentration in Purell in a laboratory environment isn't concentrated enough to inactivate all of the SARS virus in a SARS sample. But it's better than nothing. But this is why you want to wash your hands. Because washing your hands with soap and water is the best thing that you can do to get rid of the virus.
Right. I do know that. Now I'm looking. Okay. Ethyl alcohol, 70% in this one I got here. I don't know if
so 70% is pretty good.
Yeah.
So alcohol evaporates. So it depends on how old that is. But 70%, you're starting to get up around the levels, and it's ethyl alcohol, not isopropanol. That's also big positive mark in your favor.
Okay.
So SARS is more susceptible to ethyl alcohol than isopropanol.
Good.
And it's completely inactivated at concentrations up around 85-90%. And so 70%, you're probably doing a pretty good job of knocking out most of it.
So if I put two of these bottles together, I'll have 140%, right?
Wow.
Yeah, just like
Dave.
that.
Wow. We're going to take you back to sixth grade math. All right.
That's okay. We're gonna ask at the end of the clip or the show, where was the most inaccurate information?
Right.
Coming out of Dave's mouth.
If viruses are so helpful like that, how did we end up with viruses that are deadly? Is that a result of the fall?
I really don't think so. I think that we end up with things like this virus making its way through the human population because a couple of different reasons. One, we're just not aware of what we need to be aware of in nature. And number two, the things that we are aware of, we sometimes grossly mismanage them. And sometimes it's for really bad reasons. Sometimes it's for monetary gain. Sometimes it's for, things like deforestation, just to open things up because we want to conquer nature. And I think we really need to respect that nature is full of dangers, and some of those we can see. I mean, we're not going to go hug a tiger out in the, out in the savannah or whatever.
I don't know. That Netflix show, lots of people are hugging tigers right now.
Yeah. Well, and they assume certain risks when they do that, don't they?
They do. Yeah.
So really, one of the things with the original SARS outbreak and with this SARS outbreak, SARS-2, they've both come from probably wild animals as an intermediate from bat hosts. And to come through that pathway and reach the human population probably wouldn't occur if nature and humans were functioning in sort of greater respect and greater harmony. But these wet markets in China, they're actually bringing all kinds of different animals that would never cross paths with one another together in really close quarters, in really, as you might imagine, unsanitary conditions. When you have animals crowded with one another and stacked on top of one another, animals are coming in contact with things that they would never normally come in contact with in nature. And these wet markets in China are actually, in my opinion, and in many other scientists' opinions, breeding grounds for pandemics, because it's these types of environments where we're grossly mismanaging creation that we run into dangers like this.
So the way you're looking at this, that this really isn't a product of, hey, we sinned, therefore this became corrupt. You're looking at this in a way of like, we are not managing the world the way God designed us to manage it. And because we're misusing it, it's breaking down. Just like if someone were to say, hey, the shocks in my car broke, and they say, why? Well, I took it off a jump. Well, your car wasn't intended to do that. There was nothing wrong with the shocks. It's kind of like that?
Yeah, kind of like that. And so I would say that, yes, I mean, our sin is definitely contributing to the situation, but it's our ongoing sin that's contributing to the situation.
Yeah, so treat the world with respect, treat animals with respect, like all this cross-contamination and how they're handling things in wet markets. Like, you call it a wet market? Is that what you called it?
Yes, they're called wet markets because the animals are alive, and you can actually go and select the animals and have them prepared for you there.
Yeah. So the way we're dealing with that sort of stuff, we're getting all sorts of cross-contamination, and we're getting viruses that are leaping from one species to another that wouldn't normally happen. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That's essentially what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay, that's fascinating. Now, the question we hear from a lot of people though is like, okay, well, that's fine. So, we mess things up. Why does God allow that in the first place? And we've done a number of shows with Dr. Clay Jones from Baylor University. And he's going to be on next month, actually, talking about
Clay.
You know Clay?
I know and love Clay. Yes.
Yeah. So you probably know where I'm going with this, and part of the reason is, like, God allows us to make decisions, because if he stepped in every time we made a bad decision and turned us around, if every time someone pulled the trigger to shoot someone else, he turned the bullet into cotton candy, we'd be living in a cartoon world. And God didn't design a cartoon world. He designed a real world with where we have real choices and real consequences.
And I think God designed a real world with real choices and real consequences because he wants us to be formed into Christ likeness, right? People from all ages, all different types of faith backgrounds, recognize that there are certain characteristics that are developed when we face adversity. And certainly the scripture points to that too. It points to it in a different way. It says when you encounter trials, to endure with patience, right? Because when you endure, you know that Christ is being formed in you. And so to think that God created an adversity-free world in order to form free moral agents into Christ likeness, to come to trust him in the face of adversity, and to come to respond to invitations of other people who are suffering. Those are invitations for us to go deeper, to go with God, to be courageous, to be compassionate, to bear hope. And so I think people who think that the world ought to be some type of adversity-free zone, and that if it's not that, it's not what God intended. I just think that's kind of messed up.
Absolutely. I'm just reminded of James.
Did I break?
But I think we got what you're saying. James 1, talks about that. We're just about done with this part of the show. But AJ has written a book along with a couple other people. The book is called Building Bridges. And in there, she actually has a chapter called Why Would God Create Viruses? Why would God create viruses? She has a book about it. You can find that at reasons.org. The book is Building Bridges, reasons.org, or you can get it on Amazon. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to do another few minutes after the radio show's over, so you need to get over to truthrevolution.tv. Again, that's truthrevolution.tv, or sign up for the podcast if you want to hear the whole thing. Thanks, AJ.
Thanks, guys.
All right, now we're in the podcast portion only.
Yeah. Okay, and so now there's a burning question that I have.
Hit us, Dave.
And it's like, it's one of those things where people talk about, I've been hearing this thing, don't take anti-inflammatories when you start getting symptoms because that will exacerbate this virus. Is that true?
No, we don't know. We don't know that, and I don't think that that's true. From what I know about the pathophysiology, the disease physiology from SARS-1, and from what little I've read about the pathophysiology for SARS-2, you might even think that the opposite is true, because one of the things that happens in the more severe cases is that you have what's called a cytokine storm. Cytokines are chemicals that immune cells release, and when when immune cells release cytokines, it's basically calling other immune cells, recruiting other immune cells to the area. And so it sets up this kind of chaotic cascade called a cytokine storm where the immune system kind of goes wacky. And so anti-inflammatories are actually tamping down certain aspects of the immune system. And so just putting those two facts together would suggest intuitively that anti-inflammatories probably aren't doing anything bad, but maybe, because the immune system is much more complex than I just described it. There are different arms that act different ways, and you don't know if you're putting it in an imbalance. And so, but I think that azithromycin, which is an antibacterial, it's an antibiotic.
Z-Pack.
That's being azithromycin. The Z-Packs.
Yeah.
Z-Packs. Yeah. Azithromycin is being used in combination with hydroxychloroquine, which is the malaria drug. And the reason that they're using azithromycin in combination with hydroxychloroquine is because azithromycin has an anti-inflammatory effect, not because of its antibacterial effects.
That's fascinating. Interesting. Okay. So let's think about God here a little bit more. So God designed viruses. Viruses actually do good for us. The vast majority of them actually help create life or help life exist. I want to dig into that just a little bit more.
Let's go.
You said that we would be a giant, ball of bacteria without viruses. Could you explain that a little bit deeper?
Absolutely. So bacteria are they're legion. they're everywhere, and they're very diverse, and they're very fast at reproducing themselves. And bacteria are also masters of adaptation. So because they're single cells that are rather promiscuous in the way that they can swap genetic information, if a bacteria ends up in a really bad situation, there's a legion of that kind of bacteria there already, but other bacteria are there as well. And so they can pick up genes and bits of genes that might be able to help them adapt to an environment that now has a new threat that it wasn't really ready for. And so not all of them will pick it up, right? It's not like survival of all of these legion of bacteria, but one will. And because it's so quick to reproduce, it can reproduce ones just like it, which can survive because it got that new gene through horizontal gene transfer. So masters of reproduction, masters of adaptation, and they're primary producers. Bacteria are primary producers, which means they don't really need other organisms to provide anything for them. Okay. They're able to take inorganic compounds from nature and turn that into organic building blocks like amino acids and things like this. And so bacteria are at the base of life in a multitude of different ways, but one is that they're primary producers. And because of this, bacteria should fill every ecological niche and outcompete every other life form in that ecological niche.
Wow. Sure.
Because they would outproduce us and they would outadapt us.
Okay.
And so why don't they? Because the vast majority of viruses, and again, I'm going to emphasize vast, just pretend I repeated that 200 times.
Yeah.
They don't cause disease in animals or in people or in plants. They're killing bacteria. And so at the most fundamental level of life on planet Earth, we have this checks and balances of something that's a masterful reproducer that can draw from nature alone, and something that can't live in and of itself and has to infect a living cell like a bacteria in order for it to make more of itself. So we have checks and balances at the most fundamental level of life between viruses and bacteria that makes life for other organisms possible.
Yeah.
Almost like it was designed that way.
Yeah, right?
Almost like it was designed that way.
I mean, if you just look at this, and I don't know how anyone could come to the conclusion that this all happened by blind chance. I mean, we know, like, you build a building, you look at a skyscraper, and nobody looks at a skyscraper and says,
that just happened.
Oh, that just happened. Like, all the pipes in there going in the right direction, all the electrical wires hooked up exactly the right way, none of the electrical wires connected to the water lines. Like, it's all just an accident, you know. But you get the number of bacteria and the number of viruses perfectly aligned to allow life like us, and it just happened by blind chance. That's an incredible claim for someone to make.
Yes, and I always like to throw into the conversation at that point, and we don't know where viruses come from.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they can't make themselves,
right.
So that it can't have been a Darwinian event that led to viruses, right? So it's not like they self-assembled. Okay,
and this is a good time to bring up your other book, right? Because you have a book called Thinking About Evolution, 25 questions that Christians want answered. But now this book's not out yet, or is it out?
October. It's not out yet. It's due out in October.
Thinking About Evolution, and by A.J. Roberts. It's coming out. I'm sure you guys can put that on your list or look for it on Amazon or reasons.org when that comes out, or maybe even now. But I mean, this is incredible that viruses couldn't have evolved, but don't they adapt and make changes?
They do. And so, it's one of the reasons we wrote this book, Thinking About Evolution. I have several co-authors, Sue Dykes and Fazell Rana, and then another analytical philosopher has contributed a chapter, Mark Perez. But one of the reasons we wrote the book, or at least we got the idea that we needed to write a book, was because of this way that we use the word evolve in different contexts. And so to say that viruses don't evolve and then to turn around and say viruses do evolve sounds like you're just contradicting yourself.
Sure.
But you're not, because what we mean by they didn't evolve in sort of the Darwinian sense, like life from non-life or more complex life from more simple life, that's what we mean by they didn't. You don't have an origin story that fits the Darwinian narrative for viruses. But viruses adapt, they mutate, they change, they can swap genetic information similar to the way that bacteria can. And so, yes, they change over time and they adapt over time. And those are molecular evolutionary mechanisms at work. And so, yes, viruses evolve now that they're actually here, but they didn't originate through an evolutionary process.
That's fascinating. That's next level fascinating. Okay. I could talk about that for another hour, but we're not going to.
Well, you can have me back.
Yeah. What are your thoughts then on, let's just move to real practical stuff. What are some of the responses that us as Christians should have to viruses like this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we need to do is to remind ourselves daily with scripture and with prayer that our lives are in Christ and that we don't need to be fearful. Psalm 139 is my go-to psalm in almost all situations, but certainly in ones like this, because it talks about how God is intimately knowledgeable about our lives and about us, and that there's nowhere we can go that God's not already there, and that God's not waiting, and that God's not watching over us. And then it goes on to say, all of my days were numbered before I even lived one of them, which means, my days are secure. They're secure in Christ. And so I don't need to be walking in fear because I have a God who's intimately acquainted with me, who is everywhere I will ever go with me, and who's ordained my life before I even lived one day of it. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think is, we really do have an invitation to bear that hope and to bear that love that we know in Christ to other people who are fearful. And we can go in and we can minister as Christians have done throughout history in the face of plague and other diseases. We can go in because we don't care about the outcome of our own lives, because our own lives are secure in Christ. And so we can bear hope in the middle of two very dark circumstances.
Absolutely.
And we should. We should.
I think that's so right. That's so right on, because throughout history, if you're a student of the church history, you'll find that Christianity often spread rapidly when there was disaster like this, because while many people fled, Christians went into the centers of disaster and cared for people who were left behind and people who were left to die. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you're walking into the ICU room right now. And in a lot of ways, we got to be respectful and we got to, self-isolate a little bit. But at the same time, when it comes to following Christ, there is someone who, I was baptizing who said, "Hey, I may have been exposed." And for a split second, I thought maybe I shouldn't baptize him. Then I was like, who am I kidding? We're called to do what Christ tells us to do, even at the cost of our own death. And, if maybe it starts little, maybe it just starts with hey, I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm just going to call a buddy who I know is probably, high at risk. And I'm just going to say, can I do some grocery shopping for you? We can start small. It doesn't even have to start huge, but we're not here for our own benefit. We're here to glorify God and to love and serve others.
Absolutely. And if I could, Jeff, the same compassion that compels us to go into the face of danger and minister to others in the name of Christ, that same compassion should lead us to be diligent to protect those that aren't yet infected, that are vulnerable. And so we definitely need to be following public health guidelines. We need to be practicing personal hand hygiene, and personal hygiene as we go out. So reach out, but wash your hands before you do.
That's right. That's right. That's why, our church has decided right now we're streaming online, and while we allow a small group of people to be in the building, we're streaming online is the most important thing. And if someone had said to us, this is forever, churches should not meet at all, ever, I think at that point we'd say, hey, maybe it's time for a little civil disobedience. But they're not saying that. This is for every store, every restaurant, and it's only temporary. And so, the way to love people right now is to practice a little, social distance.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Did you have another thing that you want to add to that?
No, if we go back to sort of how should Christians be living in the face of this, I would say just echo what you already said. There are needs that don't go away. There are needs that are exacerbated that aren't in the news every day. So, the shelves in the grocery stores are pretty sparse. So think about what people who depend upon food banks are doing right now.
Yeah.
We always need blood and blood banks. And when people are sick, they can't donate blood. And so those of us who are well should be considering, do we need to help keep our nation's blood supply stocked, not for this disease, but for all the other disasters that we face, all the other accidents and emergencies we run into.
That's true.
And I would say the other thing that we can do, I kind of like to say four things. We love boldly, we think clearly, we serve wisely, and can't remember the fourth thing. Anyway, it must be really important.
It'll come back to you, because I want to jump on this, that thing that you just mentioned about, considering hey, the blood banks might be low now because people are scared to go out and donate. Dave works at the men's shelter here in Salina, and you've had so many people cancel who were scheduled to come out and help. How are you guys on food stocks and stuff right now?
We got plenty of food, and people continue to donate that way because it's one of those things where they don't have to come into the mission. They just drop it off. Let us know, hey, we're going to drop this off. We go out and get it and bring it in. We're doing really well on food, I think. But I just think that, fear has gripped the populace. And so we've had a ton of people who come in to volunteer, just cancel. And now with the state being locked down like it is, we've went ahead and canceled all the volunteers. And we're basically self-volunteering, stuff like that. So that's what's going on with that.
That makes sense.
So one of the things I wanted to say as I was unpacking those four is in the category of the think clearly. I think it's really important that we not spread misinformation.
Yes.
And so, I in addition to like drinking the hot water and that sort of thing, that's just not good advice. But there are other people out there that are developing all kinds of conspiracy theories about the virus's origin. And honestly, if trustworthy scientists and doctors on a global level aren't saying do this or think this way about it, then maybe we probably shouldn't be sharing that type of information until we've done a little bit of fact checking.
Well said.
Because misinformation can exacerbate fear.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the most dangerous things right now is not just the virus. I mean, even if you get the virus, which the odds are you're not, but even if you get it right now, what's the likelihood, the death rate in the United States? You said it was less than 1%.
I think it was around 0.2%.
0.2%. I mean, so that's unlikely, but you're likely to come to danger if misinformation gets out and people act wild and inappropriately. I mean, that's a big deal. So
yes.
I was going to talk a little bit about government and how dangerous governments can be, but I think I'll leave that alone for the moment. But
so I remember the fourth point, and I feel bad for having left this one out because it's pray always, right?
Yes.
And so it's just to repeat, Paul's admonishment to the Thessalonians, right? Pray without ceasing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Oh, man. AJ, it has been so good to have you here. This has been one of our most interesting shows. I appreciate your knowledge and the way you share it. You're really interesting to listen to.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Right. Dave, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Hey, God willing, definitely want to have you back sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
All right.